Live.
Hey, Mr. Pond
Hey, there's that little ditty everybody loves.
To make all my Lunker Lake dreams come true.
And there's the intro music. Chico calls that bumper music. So does Ken Milam. So, hey, let's go live. I'm sitting in the Como Inn in the quaint village town of Como, Mississippi. I've been hanging out with Premier Lake builder Buddy Floyd the last couple of days. Buddy, try to get Sean McNulty and I to come over. Sean coming from Alabama, me coming from Texas. I'd look over their shoulders and Sean would bring an electrofishing boat. Well, that date got rained out about 3 weeks ago, so we rescheduled. Sean couldn't make it, so I was able to borrow an electrofishing boat from one of my good friends who used to be a client. So now we're roaming around checking out lakes. And I'm going to tell you some things about these lakes, but you guys know the drill. First thing up, little business here. Click like. Share this to your feed, this link to this feed. Share it to your timeline. And put hashtag Pond Boss Magazine in the comments section. And let's get this party started. Looks like we got a mighty 6 folks checking in. Y'all let me know who's there so I can say howdy to you. But the last couple of days have been a whirlwind. There we go. There's Virgil Meyer checking in from Iowa. I'm hanging out in Mississippi today, buddy. That's pretty cool. So anyway, Buddy and I got together. I guess I left Granbury yesterday morning around 5 o'clock, and I rolled into Como, Mississippi about 2 in the afternoon. And man, we went straight at it. We worked on 2 lakes yesterday. The first one was probably 3 acres. And when I drove up on it, the water had a little bit different color. It had a kind of a tinted green color that I knew wasn't a plankton bloom. And when we launched this borrowed electrofishing boat and hit the pedal and started shocking fish, hello Doug Cusick, then I could tell by the amperage it was pulling that the water was not real conductive. So what that usually means, well, what it always means, is it's low in minerals, it's low in metals, and it doesn't have a lot of conductivity. So I cranked up the amperage where we could start shocking fish, and all we shocked up were cookie cutter, carbon copy, largemouth bass that were, hello Quail Man, hope everything's good down there in South Texas where you hang out. Hello Reno, good to see you. Doug finally got all his ducks in a row. What that means is he showed up at 6:30. So we could have a little fun together. Yep, Benaya from Nixon, South Texas. Quail Man, he calls himself, that's right. So anyway, we started shocking up no bass over 10 inches long. And we shocked up probably 35 or 40 bass. They were sparse, no habitat, and I knew automatically that something was wrong with the water. You know, where most folks are pretty convinced there's something wrong with the fish. Now, we did shock up a fair number of adult bluegills, but no young of the year. So describing this pond, it had kind of a greenish tint that's indicative of a lower pH. Now, if you get a pH below about 5.0 or 4.5 or something, the water almost is Mediterranean blue. There, Buddy Floyd, the boat's clean. Yeah, that electrofishing boat's got mud in it, fish slime, guts, well, no guts, but pieces of frogs, even had a cottonmouth water moccasin in it today. It had met its demise, but it was in the boat nonetheless. Hello, Fred Bingaman. And Buddy's son Hunter and his running buddy Mike have hung out with us, man. I tell you what, I love electrofishing, but man, you know, I'm old enough now that I've shocked thousands of lakes. It's not new to me, but it's still fun. But what makes it even more fun is when you have Hunter and Mike to launch the boat, load the boat, clean the boat, hook up all the electronics, and all I have to do is drive the boat and tell people what all this stuff means. Hello, John Henry. Jay Spire checking in from Virginia. My good friend Fred Bingaman. Fred, I'll be not far from you tomorrow. I got to run up and spend a few hours on Thursday working on the Purina Mills Lake up there and see what kind of status they're in. See if they've managed their predator problem, see what's going on there. But anyway, on that first pond, we shocked up a fair number of adult bluegills in the 5 to 8 inch size class, a handful that were 3 to 4 inches, and 0 baby bluegills. And when I plugged all the numbers into the spreadsheet this morning, those bass ranged from 74% relative weight up to maybe 85%. They're starving for food. But the problem wasn't the fish. The problem was two things. Everybody knows what I preach. Happy water. And that's the first thing we looked at. I'm convinced that water's not happy. I suspect the pH is around 5.2, 5.3. There's no alkalinity, so there's no basis for the food chain to thrive. And so the first recommendation was, let's get the water analyzed. The second thing is, there's no habitat. There's no place for fish to congregate, no place for baby fish to hide. Any fish coming off of a nest is eaten immediately. I only saw one place where I thought bluegill were spawning in that whole pond. They need more places to spawn, which tracks back to the habitat stuff. And so those are the two key things for that pond, and the fish are just a response. And then the second one we went to was real tannic. It was kind of in the midst of a bunch of hardwoods in sandy loam country, and the acidity was even higher in that pond because the conductivity for the electrofishing boat was even lower. The same thing there, we shocked up a bunch of cookie cutter carbon copy bass, but they were in better shape. Their body condition was up, which makes me suspect that they're pretty young. Matter of fact, I'm convinced they're really young. And the habitat was pretty good. They had some pretty darn good structure and cover in there. But I know the water's not happy, and not one bluegill. Not one. Which I thought was really interesting. Well, this morning, hello Larry Hardesty. Let's see, heck, we got Wayne. Hey Wayne. Holy cow, man, you guys are another flood over there. You guys are struggling. I'm rooting for you. And I know Texas Hunter is going to stand behind those feeders, so let's get those feeders dried out from the flood. I see Todd Austin, Mike Cottrell, Jay Spires, John Henry. Let's see here. Gary Obern's from Southeast Louisiana. Good to see you. Larry Hardesty. Ken Weber, 1.5-year-old, 1 acre pond in Southeast Louisiana. Fathead minnows are 1 year old, and the population is very healthy and definitely reproducing. I stocked F1 tiger bass, 6 inches long, 1 month ago. They have more than enough to eat. My question is, what size food pellet should I be using now that the copper nose are 8 inches and bass 6 inches? Use Aquamax 600. That's a 3/8 inch pellet. They could eat that, and it's a good recipe for them, a good formulation for both those species of fish. So we shocked the lake this morning, and beautiful. And actually, I went live for about, 5 or 10 minutes. You guys need to, all you fans need to watch that because that's a pretty darn good little video. Hello, Chuck. Good to see you from South LA. Can't wait, man. I need to get back down there. You can't find good boudin much farther north than where you are. So on the lake this morning, totally different. The bass were slightly underweight. It was a real tannic pond, but it was surrounded by cypress trees. What's really cool is those cypress trees were planted about 80 years ago. And the man that planted them is still alive. He planted them when he was like 13 years old. And the owner of the property now, it's his first cousin. He's been able to buy that property and keep it in the family. So this is a beautiful, mature pond, 80 years old, loaded up with cypress needles. And, I mean, it's an organic, tannic lake. So one of the normal things I think people would think about it would be, let's fertilize it. I said, no, let's don't, because there was so much excellent vegetation growing around the perimeter. There was a little bait of structure in the middle of the lake. But the bass were overcrowded. They were slightly underweight, but the food was abundant. So what gives there? The bait fish have plenty of places to hide. So that was a totally different deal. And there's so much organic matter that's built up over the years that the lake is providing its own source of food to feed things like crawfish and paraphyton. When we pulled the boat out, we pulled out what looked like a 40-pound bag of peat moss wrapped around the axle of the boat when we came out. And it was just, you could smell the peat smell, and I know that stuff is full of bacterial colonies. The bottom line is, it's producing a food chain that takes the place of fertilization, so there's no chance I would tell those guys to fertilize that lake. All right, so, and then we did one after that was a pretty good sized lake, probably 12 or 15 acres. That lake, I'll get to your questions here in just a second. I see them coming up. Hello, Mark Dyer. Jay, I got yours. Virgil, I see yours. Yep. Yep, Steve Scharf, good to see you, and John Dyer, good to see you. So, then the fourth lake we did was about 12 acres, 15 acres maybe, 12 to 15, something like that. And the bluegill numbers were pretty healthy, but the bass were crowded again, which is very typical. But Buddy had been reworking that lake, and he dragged a couple of cedars out there before the lake refilled. And one of these cedars was laying on its side, and probably a third of it was sticking out of the water. And the water was probably 5 feet deep. So I stepped off the pedal, pulled right up in the middle of that cedar tree laying on its side, hit the pedal, and it looked like popcorn. There were crappie, bluegills, largemouth bass, golden shiners just boiling out of that. So the take-home point for those guys, and part of the mission to come here is to help those guys learn more about pond management so they can kind of broaden their business and broaden their horizons to get more involved in pond management. So their take-home point was just how valuable different items of habitat are to a pond or a lake. So that was a pretty big deal. And then the last one we went to is owned by a cattleman who, and I always ask people their goals. I ask him his goals. He says, we have a nesting pair of eagles on a property adjacent to us, and they come and spend time at our lake. I want to feed the eagles. Well, I know he's got a 4-year-old grandchild, which probably doesn't want to fish yet, but he's in the cattle business. That's what he does. And as we launched the boat and started going around, man, we shocked up 3 different size classes of white crappie. Oh, by the way, ask these Mississippi guys if they know the difference between a white crappie and a black crappie. They do now. They didn't, but now they do. But they know better than to go argue that with the old heads at the coffee shop at 5:30 in the morning. They'd lose that argument. So we saw, I don't know, we probably only spent 20 minutes electrofishing that lake, just enough to find out that it's 25 acres plus. The water is extremely muddy. And as we were leaving, I bet you 150 head of cattle waded into that pond and started drinking. I can't imagine that whole lake is muddy just because of that, because they've had fresh rains. But one of the things I counsel people on is if you want to protect your pond and minimize erosion, keep the cattle out of it. You know, it's great to suggest people fence off a lake or a pond and then run a pipe down to a bigger watering trough downstream with a float on it so they can drink all they want, you know, from a trough. Now, he's running a lot of head of cows, you know, so that might not work for him. Bottom line is that lake is packed with white crappie. Black crappie. No, wait. That lake was white. How do I know the difference between a black and a white crappie? Help me out here, guys. You saw him today. But anyway, I know this. He's going to have way too many crappie in that lake because he has no predators to eat them. All we shocked up were bluegills, a couple of great big golden shiners, full grown, 6-7 inches long, and a whole bunch of crappie in 3 different size classes from about 4 to 6, 6 to 8, and then 8 to 12 inches long. And so those are 5 different scenarios, and those guys got a good dose of it today, and it was really, really fun yesterday and today. So let's see. Let's pack into these questions here. I'm staying at this quaint Como Inn. Look at this. It's kind of cool back there. Check all that out. Buddy did that. He booked this for me. He even paid for it. Go, Buddy. And I'm much appreciative. Okay, let's see here. We already handled that Ken Weber's question about the Aquamax MVP. So let's see what else we got here. Virgil Meyer. Bob, can you review how I should manage the filamentous algae as we go through the warm season? Minimum and maximum. Well, all right. Your lake now, Virgil's in kind of eastern Iowa. And his lake now, I think, is in about its 3rd year of completion, been stocked for 2 years. So it's getting to the point, he's got, I know he's got bluegill, red ear sunfish, fathead minnows. I know you stocked, I think you stocked walleye and smallmouth. I don't remember if the largemouth are in it yet or not. I don't remember that. But here's what I know. Virgil's ready to go fishing. So the filamentous algae, there's, good gosh, 15,000 species of that literally in the United States. Most of the filamentous algae in our part of the planet boils down to just 6 or 7 different species. Most of those can be controlled with a copper-based, chelated copper-based algicide like Cutrine Plus. Now, Cutrine Plus comes in most of the time it comes in liquid, so you can spray it with a backpack sprayer. Now, the thing to know about algae is when filamentous algae is volatile. It grows really fast, it dies fast, and then more grows. So as long as you guys got to remember this, there's got to be three things happen. You got to have the right temperature, you got to have sunlight, and food. You take away any one of those, and a plant's not going to grow, including filamentous algae. Now, filamentous algae just happens to prefer cooler water. So it starts off growing earlier than most other plants. So right now in Iowa, I can imagine filamentous algae is really rocking and rolling pretty good. Now, when it dies, it floats to the top. That's when you see it. So don't think about spraying the mats that are on top. If you want to bust up those mats, you can do that with a trash pump from a boat if you want to get that serious about it. But it's being fed. The dead mats are being fed by live plants beneath the dead mats. And algae doesn't live very long. It just lives a few days and it dies, but then as it's dying, there's more growing. And so as long as that temperature window is open, algae is going to grow. Now, once the temperature gets warmer, algae's nature is to cut back and quit growing so much. So on minimum and maximum, I'm going to tell you, you should not need to treat algae with a herbicide more than 3 times through the course of a year before it disappears on its own. And in your case, I'd be looking at a chelated copper compound like Cutrine Plus. The other thing to think about, in states where tilapia are legal, they're a pretty good choice as well. So you can, I know Texas tilapia are legal, Louisiana they're not. I don't know their status in Iowa. Illinois they're not, Missouri they're not. So tilapia babies are pretty darn good at eating filamentous algae. Okay, Jay, caught your live stream today. Reminded me to ask, how do you tell or guesstimate age? Noticed you aged the bluegill in the video. Is there a way for us that aren't as educated to know? Sure. Mark Corser's complimenting me. Hey, Mark, from Lexington, Kentucky. Yeah, dude, man, I've lost like 75 pounds. You and I have talked about that. It's hadn't been that hard. It's actually been kind of fun. Never dreamed it would be. Okay, so let's say we're going to age some largemouth bass. A pretty simple way to do that is to get like a little I don't remember what we called them. We used them in chemistry lab and biology lab. It's a wooden dowel with a needle in it, and or you can get a small nail and just pick off 5 or 6 scales off the lateral line of a bass, and then if you can lay them on a piece of glass, just go ahead and buy a little box of glass slides if you want to do this, and then buy some betadine disinfectant. And just put a dropper, couple of drops of iodine on the scale, and it will dye it. Then you can look at it through a magnifying glass and count the rings. And if you'll do that on 5 or 6 scales and average that number, that's real close to what the age is. Now, the fish that I was aging today, I could tell by their body conformation about how old they are, because those biggest bluegill, I know bluegill live 6 to 8 years in this climate. And as I was judging the oldest bluegill, I knew that it had 2 or 3 more years left because it was still pretty meaty. Its eyes hadn't bulged out yet, which they typically do. Their eyes, like on a bass, its eyes will begin to bulge like they're going to come out of its socket when they're getting way on up there toward geriatric ages. But I could also tell by the size classes and the time of year about how old those fish should be. So when I looked at those small bluegill, there were some that were about 2 inches long. Those cannot be more than about 4 or 5 weeks old. It takes about 30 days for a bluegill to go from an egg to right at 1.5 inches to 2 inches. In another 15 days, they'll be knocking on the door at 2.5 inches and weigh about 30 per pound. And then the next size, I knew that was probably the same age, but it was a little bit bigger, which tells me that fish is a little bit more aggressive and got the genetics to grow a little bit faster than its little brother, cousin, nephew, niece, whatever the heck that one was. And so, but then I could also tell that those 4-inchers looked like they were hatched back in the fall, which makes sense in that climate. So I'm judging their age not so much by scientifically counting rings on scales, but judging from the size classes in that body of water. So when you've done it for 45 years and you've aged a bunch over the years, you get to where you can get a pretty good estimate, and people will believe it. And it made sense. Ken Weber, thank you. Your help has been priceless. Well, I wasn't going to ask for a check anyway. Well, maybe I will. All right, look at there. Steve Thorburn checking in from Central Kansas. The Palm Boss is doing. There's Mark Williams checking in from Mountain Home, Arkansas. Hey, Mark, good to see you, buddy. How you like that long hair? Yeah, White crappie, that's right. Okay, I knew Buddy would come through. Those were in the first lake, black crappie. Last lake, white crappie. The one where they're getting really overcrowded. White crappie, here's a little known fact. White crappie reproduce about 30% more than black crappie do. Black crappie get bigger and they reproduce a little bit less, although they still have a tendency to overpopulate. But the white crappie, they reproduce, they have a lot more eggs when they go at it. So there you go. Hello, Michael, Eric. Hey, Mark, I was going to tell you, man, y'all, I know a couple of guys that picked on me for my hair. I guess I'm being a hippie or something. So about a year ago, and y'all that know me and know Debbie, Fred knows this, Debbie's got a tendency to tell me what to do. She actually calls herself the Palm Boss Boss. I guess it's true. Nah, maybe so. So anyway, last April, a year ago, she looked at me, she said, and just it was more about her tone than what she said. She said, "You need to go get a haircut." So I just looked at her and I said, "No, I think I'm gonna let it grow out," because I thought that would just send her to the next level. I told you to go get a haircut. Well, you know what she did? She said, "Have you ever let your hair grow out?" Yeah, I knew I was busted then. I said, "No, I never have." She said, "I kind of like that idea. So I'm letting my hair grow out because Debbie said so." Well, okay, boys, I'm gonna have to lay my man card out on the table. The last couple of times that it had a little cutting to do on it, she drugged me to her beauty shop, and now they're talking to me about product. I think I might go get my hair cut. Let's talk fish. Mark Williams, buddy. Hope you're doing good. All right, Benaya says, "Hi, my 1.5 acre pond is about half filled with water. I'm looking to put some bait fish in soon. I want to build DIY habitat, and I know that it should be 4 to 5 deep, but how much should I install and where should they be installed?" Okay, Benaya, I would put, if you made friends with a plumber, see if he's got any 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch or even 1 inch PVC pipe pieces. And then if you'll take those bigger pieces like the 1 inch pipe and drill some 1/2 inch holes through them, you can start shoving 1/2 inch PVC pipe into it and make a little tree, and then you can buy couplings and couple those together. And those work pretty good. So if you can get some 3 to 4 foot, of the 1 inch pieces and some 3 to 4 foot, 5 foot, 1/2 inch pieces, you can build some trees. Now, otherwise, where you live, I got a suspicion that you've got a bunch of mesquite trees. Another thing you can do is you can build, since your pond's half full, what I would do is I would, okay, I'm getting caught up here. Hang on. Yep. All right. I'm reading. Okay, what you can do is, I tell you what, if you would, when we're through with the show, go to the Pond Boss YouTube page and do a search for habitat, and there's 2 or 3 videos there. You can take some of your mesquite trees with a chainsaw and cut off sticks that are like cut off limbs that are 4 to 5 feet long, and then take a center post. There's my wife calling. She knows I'm not broadcasting. Hey, honey.
Yeah.
Guess what I'm doing right now?
I don't know.
Really?
Well, yeah. Oh, shoot. Yeah. Okay, Bob.
Oh, shoot. Bye. So, when you look at those videos, Benaya, look at the teepees, and you can make some where you can take a T-post driver and sharpen the ends of some of those limbs on those mesquites and drive them down into the mud or into the ground, or do it with the T-post, and then take some of those 4 and 5 foot long sticks and attach them to a center post like a teepee. And you don't need but 5 or 6 of those limbs all the way around to make a teepee. Another thing you can do is make some what I call tic-tac-toe boards. Because I suspect you've got plenty of mesquite, and that's an invasive plant down that part of the country. So if you've got, if you feel like it, you can make some stuff out of that. You can make some, cut those things 8 feet long and stack them like a tic-tac-toe board up 3 or 4 feet. I know it should be 4 or 5 feet deep, but how much should I install, and where should they should be installed in water that's going to be about 5 to 8 feet deep and come within about 3 feet of the surface. Another thing you can do is you can put some gravel beds around that shallow area in 3 feet of water where it's flattish. If it's flat, you can do that. So you can make stuff out of PVC pipe. I mean, I've seen some pretty creative stuff where people take some of that corrugated plastic sewer pipe and cut it into pieces and make it look like a flailing robot with 14 arms and stuff. That works pretty good too. Stephen Martini, have you ever heard of Bioballs they sell to clarify ponds? The description of this product says it has bacteria that eats algae. Rose Hill, Kansas. And I see Mark Corser said, I used them in a koi pond and they never worked. The only one that I found out that worked was a product from Keaton Industries called K1 Nitro. Okay. Jeremy Day checking in, but I can't stay. I'll watch later. Got a softball banquet. What? You'd rather listen to a banquet speaker and eat rubber chicken than watch this? That's pretty funny. John Henry's trying to coach, convince, connive, convince, and make Calvin Treat check in. I hope Calvin does. Tell Calvin I just shouted out to him. So here's my take on the Bioballs. What Bioballs are is they're little plastic. They look like, what's the best description? Like a wiffle ball that are small, and they're designed to go into a biofilter. So the Bioballs are designed to where you pump water through this canister of whatever size it needs to be for how much water you're pumping, and you fill it with the Bioballs, and the Bioballs bounce around in there, and paraphyte and bacterial colonies grow on the Bioballs. That's the way they're designed to work. So if you're not really pumping any water through a filter, then they don't really. So the Bioballs don't have bacteria. What the Bioballs do is provide the substrate on which bacteria grows when you're sending oxygenated water over it. That's the way that works. They're really not practical for ponds like what we've got. Hey, there's Dave Davidson checking in. Dave Davidson had his 132nd birthday recently. Dave Davidson, he is the very first moderator on the Pond Boss website. He gives great advice. He's had a pond forever on property up near Bowie, Texas, and we love Dave Davidson. Hey, it's 6:58. Let's do a little commercial. I have no props with me here. I didn't even think about that. I went to a seminar not long ago and taught for about half a day. And every Pond Boss magazine I had in my hands, I gave out that day, hoping to get people to subscribe. So I'm going to play like I'm holding a Pond Boss. Hey, Pond Boss magazine, $35 a year, cheaper than a Friday night date, and it lasts a year. So jump online, go to the Pond Boss website. Pond Boss website's a great resource for you anyway. Subscribing to the magazine fuels the economy of what is Pond Boss. It helps pay for hosting our website. It helps cover the print bill. Advertisers help foot the bill to help make sure that Leanne has a job, and so, but the thing I'm proudest about Pond Boss is we kick out some really good information you can't find anywhere else, and it's timely. As a matter of fact, each issue that I produce with the help of the writers is based on that season and what's going on, so I would love to ask you to subscribe to Pond Boss. You can go to the Pond Boss website and do it and check in. Other resources besides pondboss.com, as I mentioned earlier, our YouTube page where we got lots of podcasts and archive all these Facebook Lives. Now, I don't think I've caught up the last 6 or 7 of these on YouTube, but I will when I get a minute. Texas Hunter Feeders. Matter of fact, one of the lakes we worked on today, the one that had the wide variety of fish with the great big cedar tree in the middle, that has a Texas Hunter feeder on it, and I wasn't there when it went off, but they told me that the bluegill just erupt on that feed. They're feeding Purina's Aquamax MVP, which is 9 different pellet sizes and a formulation designed just for bluegills, feed-trained bass, and any other carnivorous warm water sport fish that we would have. Okay, Larry Hardesty says, let's see what he said. It scrolled up on me. So if a bluegill is hand size, how old do you think it might be? I'm going to tell you an age range. If it's hand size, which is about 7 inches long, it's got to be at least 3 years old, unless you're really pouring the coals to it with feed. If you're feeding really, really heavily, then that fish could be 2 years old. But that's going to be the NFL superstars that are growing faster than any fish on the planet. But most of the time, a fish that is 7 inches long is about 3 years old. I've seen them as old as 5 years old. Now, by the time they get to be 6, 7, and 8, they're typically 7.5 to 9 inches. Unless you're feeding them, they could be as big as 11 or 12 inches. And 12-inch bluegills knocking on the door of 2 pounds. Most of them at 12 inches are 2 pounds. And that's kind of the gold standard in today's world. Reno is filling a 5-acre pond for the first time. Is there a period of time to wait on stocking, even if the water is testing ideal for fish? I've had some people tell me to wait a year. Do not wait. I'm real adamant about that. I'm real confident about that. Let me tell you why. The longer you wait, especially you're in South Texas, I can't tell you how many of those tributaries down there that feed into the different rivers, like the Frio or the Rio Grande, the Colorado even, but even farther south than that, those tributaries have carp, and they have other native species of sunfish that you don't necessarily want. So when that pond is full enough, and here's the advice I tell people, and I've learned this the hard way. When we have at least half the surface acreage covered with water, with a minimum of 8 feet of depth in the deepest part, going into a rainy season, I tell people to put in your fathead minnows at least. If you're comfortable at that point, and we look like there's some rain on the horizon, stock bluegills and red ears and get those established. Because the longer you wait, if you've got a handful of green sunfish, bullheads, carp, gar, whatever, they're going to establish. And you don't want that. So there's not a reason in the world to wait to stock the fish. Now, the theory behind that, some people tell you to wait because they think the water has to season. It doesn't have to season. It's seasoning as you go. Water falling out of the sky, running across the ground is typically pretty healthy water, although it's not exactly like it's going to be in a year. Because when it sits there for a year, it's got time to absorb more nutrients, more minerals, more metals, and then create a food chain. But I promise you, within about 3 or 4 weeks of filling up, there's a food chain developing. I looked at a pond a few days ago that's been full 3 weeks, and it was teeming with tadpoles and insect larvae. You could see them. Looked like little black Tootsie Roll Pops, tiny little bitty squigglers that were toad tadpoles. So that's a good. I'd go ahead and do it. I don't want to dwell on that, but I'd go ahead and do it. Ian Swanger, tilapia, how many pounds per acre? 20, 25? 20 pounds. My recommendation. Okay, so here's the way I see that. If you're stocking tilapia to help bolster the food chain, I think 10 pounds per acre is enough. They cost 12 or 13 pounds per acre depending on the quantity you buy. The more you buy, the cheaper they are. I don't want to use the word cheaper because nothing's cheap right now. We have this thing called inflation or something, right? Geez, never been happier to pay $3.04 a gallon for gas as I was today compared to yesterday at $3.24. Ridiculous. So anyway, if you're wanting to control filamentous algae, or at least try to get ahead of it, I'd say more like 20 pounds per acre. 25 is a little more than you need, but the only way I would bless that is if the filamentous algae is just running off with you. If there's way too much filamentous algae, I might be convinced to go up. Now, when you start looking at that, you're basically saying, okay, for a 10-acre lake, I'm going to stock 200 pounds of tilapia. That's going to cost $2,500. Well, if you treat it with algicide 3 times, you've spent $2,500. The difference is with the tilapia, you're also creating biomass. So with the herbicide, you're killing the algae, but you're not releasing getting rid of its root nutrients. When you stock tilapia and they eat it, they're turning it into flesh. So a considerable amount of those nutrients can be converted to flesh, and here's what happens with tilapia. Now, I'm not real comfortable stocking tilapia in areas where I don't think they're going to die over the winter. Tilapia die at 52 degrees, at least the Mozambique tilapia that we're supposed to be stocking. So when they die at 52 degrees, then they're gone. I used to kind of be worried about that, but here's what happens. As fall sets and comes on, the temperature begins to fall, the tilapia start to get sluggish. And those that haven't been consumed by bluegills or small bass, they get sluggish, they just get devoured. The other thing I like about them as a forage fish bolsterer is that I have seen in a number of lakes increased survival rates of spring spawned bluegills in the fall. So I've seen the incidence of bluegills go up in the fall in typically bass crowded lakes, and I've seen it repetitively in several lakes, which makes me close to convinced that they're part of the reason that the survival rates of bluegill are higher in lakes like that. So apples to apples, I think if the opportunity is there, and you know what, Buddy asked me some pretty good questions today. He said, what do you think about this fish? Or what do you think about that fish? What do you think about crawfish? And here's my standard answer. I see different fish. I see herbicides. I see cutter boats. I see a whole lot of tools. One of the conversations Buddy and I were having is should I stock threadfin shad or golden shiners? Well, you don't look at those fish as the same. Golden shiners are a totally different species that live in a different niche and live a different lifestyle than do threadfin shad. Threadfin shad are filter feeders. They're going to swim through the water, gleaning their food from the water. So if you don't have a good fertile pond with a heavy-duty plankton bloom, you're not going to have enough food to support threadfin shad. So Bruce Condello, reporting from Nebraska. Let's take this to Bruce. Bring us your report, Bruce. I wonder if I can bring him on. I don't know. Hey, there's George Spann. Yeah, man. Boy, I tell you what. Floods. Bruce, I don't think I can bring you on. I try. No, I don't think I can. There's Gil Cannonberg checking in. Is Cedar Creek Lake flooded, George? I can't see how it would be. They're probably releasing water like crazy there, though. Boy, I know that whole watershed is just underwater. But anyway, going back to that conversation, we were talking about the difference between threadfin shad and golden shiners. Golden shiners are predators, limited by mouse size. They're notorious nest raiders, but they're resilient. They can live. They can roll on in a fish population and not be decimated like fathead minnows can, for example. Threadfin shad are going to die at 42 degrees. So if you live in an area north of a line from, say, Waco to Shreveport to Meridian, Mississippi, then upward to the Atlantic seaboard, if you live south and east of that line, they probably do pretty good. But you live north of that line, odds are pretty high they're going to die in the winter. So where I'm going is all these different things are tools in the pond manager's toolkit. And if you can recognize what those tools are, and the way you do it with fish is you learn their lifestyle. You learn what they eat, how they reproduce, what eats them, how fast do they grow, what kind of water do they like. Learn all that. You can learn that. That's out there now. You've got this thing called the University of Google that I didn't have growing up. I had to go do it or pay Ma Bell 25 cents a minute to talk to long distance to somebody that knew more than I did about it. But now, my counsel to you, my advice to you would be to go check out these. Before you do anything, check it out and see the consequences. Like asking about, like Virgil asking about how do I deal with my filamentous algae. In his circumstance, an herbicide's probably the best bet. I just don't think he can get tilapia in Iowa. I just don't know the law there, but I would sure check that out. And if there's a source, I'd sure look at it, knowing they're going to die. And they're not going to make a mess because when they get sluggish, they get devoured. The first time I stocked some tilapia in a lake, I think it was like 2005 or 6, and I'd braced myself for a massive die-off about Thanksgiving. Well, man, I kept monitoring that lake, and finally I started seeing some tilapia get sluggish and start coming to the surface seeking heat. and we were able to net probably 100 pounds of them. Pretty good sized lake there. Tanisha checking in from Como, Mississippi. How'd you know? Somebody must have told you. I wonder if it was Mike. I bet Mike told you. That's cool. I'm so glad you're checking in from. I'm checking in from Como, Mississippi, from the Como Inn. Lone Oak, Texas, checking in. Legacy Pond Dreamer. I love that. So, anyway, learning about these different tools to manage your pond helps you become a better pond manager. But there's more. Like, what was that guy that sold Ron Popeil, the Fish-O-Matic, or wherever it was, the Pocket Fisherman, that's what it was. But there's more. So when you start trying to make these decisions, you think about the proper tool. Should it be herbicide? Should it be tilapia? Should it be, leave it alone and let it grow? What choice are you going to make? Then you got to decide, what are the consequences of that? Because when you use a herbicide, for example, you're not going to get rid of the nutrients. You're just going to recycle them for something else to grow. Like there's been times in the early spring when somebody will call me and say, hey, I'd like to kill this filamentous algae. And I go look at the lake, and that filamentous algae is covering the lake.